became 13 in 1938. 1938. And I was at school in Bradford at the time. I had been disappointed that I didn't pass the 11 plus, but my parents paid for me to go to a commercial school in Bradford. It was called the City School of Commerce in those days. So it entailed a bus journey because I lived at Berlin Wharfdale. And we had quite a lot of fun on the buses. We weren't very good at times. We would fire pellets with our rulers against the boys who were on the bus. And in the end, one bus conductor was so cross with us that he put us off the bus in the middle of Hollins Hill. And there wasn't another one, of course, for a quarter of an hour or so, coming that way for home. So when I got home I was in trouble because I was late, and I had to explain, and my mother wasn't best pleased with my behaviour, as you can imagine. Because of the war, the school closed down in 1939 when war was declared. We were told we hadn't to go to school for 2 weeks, and during that 2 weeks I heard from the principal of the school that I had to go for an interview in Ilkley about a job. And it was an interesting job because it was for working for a firm who had evacuated from London, and they were engaged on war contracts for the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, with the things that they made. So when I was 18 and due for call-up, my boss said, "Oh, give me your call-up papers, Miss Holmes." I was always addressed as Miss Holmes, and I would see to them. So off he went to sort it out, and I was declared to be in a reserved occupation. The cinema, we had to come into Ilkley to the cinema, and we went to the new cinema occupied by Boyle's departmental store. But we did see a lot of wartime films, and I remember 1 or 2 of them. One was In Which We Serve, another was Brief Encounter. And I think, you were asking about film stars, and I think my heartthrob really was Gregory Peck. Very good looking. And I think he really was my heartthrob.
My name's Mavis Thornton, and I became 13 in 1941. And I was actually away at boarding school. So we were very lucky in 1940. Well, I think we were lucky. Our school was evacuated from the south coast, Bexhill-on-Sea, to a stately home in Berkshire, it was then, between Farringdon and Lechlade, called Buscott Park. It's now open to the National Trust. There were about 100 girls, and that's where we spent the war years. We were very privileged, it was lovely. And our lessons, some of them were in the stable blocks because we weren't allowed to use ink in the house, because of damage that could have been done if it had been spilt. We were treated really as, when we first started there, as young people. Very, we weren't given many rights or privileges when you were 13. You just did your best and kept quiet and behaved yourself. But gradually, as we got older, we were given more responsibility. We had a house system, and you matured, and gradually you did become treated as young adults. I left when I was 17, and I think during the war we'd no television, of course, but occasionally we'd listen to important radio broadcasts. I think we heard some of Churchill's. And Tommy Handley on the radio was a wonderful, he lifted all our spirits, and it was called Itmar, the show, It's That Man Again. And we enjoyed that. And the films, I enjoyed the same as Kathleen, but I do remember Deanna Durbin. I think she was around when I was a teenager. She was an actress with a lovely singing voice, and her films such as Spring Parade, 100 Men and a Girl. I can't just remember any of the others, but that was very, very enjoyable. And, oh, I do remember the night of the Coventry raid, which Ralph's already mentioned. And it was, even though we were a long way away in West Berkshire, I think we might have been in the flight path of some of the planes, but we that were sleeping on the top floor were brought down to the dormitories on the main floor down below, and we had to sleep top to tail, two in a bed that night, because I think that was all they could do. We'd no air raid shelters. It was so rural. But I do remember that Coventry raid very well. And I myself, my home was in London, in Ealing, and I was there during the Blitz of 1940, and we had a shelter and had to go down into that. It was damp and it was uncomfortable. We didn't sleep in it, but later we had a Morrison table shelter which you crawled into. It was like a big, huge, flat metal box, and we slept in that because the raids were so persistent all through the summer of 1940. And in fact, I went back to school a week early because, and there was a few of us did who were living in the south in dangerous areas from air raids, and we went back a week early to school and got to know Buscott Park before the main school opened. That was an advantage. We were very lucky. We never had, my own home was never bombed, although there were bombs in Ealing, but it was the west side of London, and the really bad air raids were in the east. I do remember seeing the sky alight, really pink with the fires when the Tate and Lyle sugar factories were bombed and all the sugar was blazing, and that was in May, I think, 1941. Is there anything else?
Well, just for either of you, do you remember much about music of the times, or even the clothing, hairstyles, fashions,
well,
those sort of things?
The hairstyles, yes, a lot of the women wore what was called the Victory Roll. They put a band round their head and then took the hair up from the back and rolled it round the band. We didn't do that, but at school our hairstyles were either a bob, you know, cut short, or plaits. You didn't wear your hair long and loose like they do today. You had two plaits, tidily done, and you were quite somebody when you learnt to plait your own hair. Because music, oh well, there was all the wartime, there were quite a lot of songs which would come back, which should come back to me, but at the time, Amapola,
Could hang out the washing on the Siegfried line.
That's right, yes, the Siegfried line, hang out the washing on the Siegfried line, if the Siegfried line's still there. That was the line that Germany built between France and Germany on the border to hope that that would keep the Germans out of France, but in point of fact it didn't.
There'll be bluebirds over.
Oh yes, Vera Lynn, she was used to sing to the troops. She was wonderful, was Vera Lynn.
Yes.
She's still living.
Yeah.
Bless her. And all her songs, and Gracie Fields, she sang for the troops. Wish Me Luck When You Wave Me Goodbye,
Yeah.
on the radio, and then they had programmes like Workers' Playtime, which was put on at midday to cheer the factory workers on. They used to allow that to be played in factories during the war. Music while you work, yes, and that sort of thing. Yeah, and I remember for my, well no, I was 21 by that time, it's irrelevant, but I got my first portable radio of my very own, and that was really something, you know. No televisions, good heavens, no.
Well, that's great. So if we come to teenagers of today, and your thoughts, your views on today's teens, what would your views be?
Yes, well, teenagers that I meet are either in the church or as I'm walking back from town with my shopping trolley, and I try to avoid, if I can, the what I call the oncoming tide.
Yes, that's it, yeah. I know the feeling.
Because it is rather difficult, 3 abreast. However, what do I think of them? I think they're very privileged young people compared to the education that was available for me. So many of them have the opportunity to go to university, which was only for the very few privileged people when I was a teenager. I think many of them are kind and caring. I suppose the ones I meet in the church are the ones I know the best. And they do all kinds of things in community work, but I'm sure from the grammar school you have a programme in the community. And I have a feeling that you came down in pairs at one time to help in the coffee centre. And the girls we had, I was working in the coffee centre then, and the girls we had to help us were always very friendly, very polite, and very thoughtful. Sometimes I think about the clothes they wear, of course, and I'm glad to see that a lot of them nowadays wear long, warm-looking tights. I think that's a great sign of them being sensible. But I think on the whole, they do reflect the attitudes of the community around them.
About teenagers today, well, yes, I agree with Kathleen, mostly apart from, you know, those are the ones I meet are the ones in Tesco's at lunchtime, and I try to avoid it because some of them they come in like the tide and you have to get out of the way unless you want to be swamped. But and coming back, when I'm coming back with my shopping basket on wheels, now I walk along with my head down, not looking, and expect them to go around me, because otherwise I'd be jumping out of their way all the time, because they're coming, you know, 3 and 4 together along the pavement.